r/askReddit. What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? I had a similar situation. To preface this story, I should let you know that I have Tourette's, the physical tic kind. So where I grew up is a town well known around my province for being a super druggy city. Almost everyone who grows up there gets into some kind of substance as there's nothing else to do. For some people, you become a pothead and maybe do some psychedelics in high school, then grow out of it and hopefully leave the city. For a lot of others, you get deeper into drugs. This story takes place in high school, pretty close to my peak drug days. I had only been into weed and shrooms, but the people around me were going deeper into stuff like pills. I was pretty adamant to not get into that kind of stuff, partially because I've seen what that stuff can do firsthand through a family member who got on meth and ruined his life within months. And partially because this town was sorn sketchy, and most of the time the pills you buy aren't what the dealer claims they are. I had friends buy Molly that ended up being a cocktail of stuff like fentanyl, meth, etc. But of course, with all your friends doing this stuff, it becomes a bit tempting and is in your mind. Anyway, now to the main story. I was working at McDonald's. I had worked in the downtown McDonald's, which was where most the addicts would go. I was working the closing shift and handing out order up front. When I called out an order, a man walked up. Obviously, he was into drugs to some capacity. You could just kinda tell by looking at him. One thing I noticed immediately was he had the same type of physical tics that I had from Tourette's. When he walks up to me, he says, "Do you play guitar?" I say, "Yeah, how did you know?" And he just says something along the lines of, "Keep doing it, you'll do well," and smiled and walked off. I know that doesn't seem too odd, but I had just started playing guitar seriously within that year, but wasn't taking it serious enough to write songs or anything. I always just say I did, then procrastinate about it and smoke weed instead. But that interaction really got me to start working harder on it. I started recording stuff. Through that, I got really close with my friend Sam. I enjoyed hanging out with Sam a lot more because he was showing me a whole new world of music and how to make music. Eventually, I stopped hanging out with my druggy friends and started spending more time with him, which eventually got me into releasing music, which eventually got me into recording school and let me move out of that town and go to a bigger city. Near the end of high school till early college, weed had really taken over my life. I'm one of those people who experience psychosis cause of weed because of diagnosed mental illnesses I have. It was getting really bad to the point where I was literally hearing voices, become mentally detached from reality, and constantly had panic attacks over nothing. But I was so addicted to weed it didn't matter how bad it got, I couldn't stop smoking. Once I moved away from that town for college, I became so dedicated to music that I quit smoking and other drugs altogether. I had some bumps in the road, but in general have stayed off and been really productive. After graduating college, me and Sam were able to move to our dream city right downtown when we were only 19. And after quitting weed, I started treating music as a full-time job and got way better. And eventually led me into new forms of music and film scoring and so much other stuff. I'm at the point where I'm confident that within the next few years I'll be able to make a living off the arts full-time. I know that I went really in-depth there, but my point, and to tie back to your story, is this. IDK who that guy was at McDonald's, but the whole situation had a weird supernatural feeling to it. And the fact he had the same tics as me and everything. It almost feels like it was a version of myself from another universe coming to stop from making bad decisions that would lead me down the wrong path. I honestly believe that that interaction was one of the building blocks that set me up to get to this life I'm living now. I look into the past a lot and realize how many specific things have happened that seemed like they were bad situations that directly got me to where I am today. My son, now 10, was 4 and was able to name my grandmother by name by a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. He said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. Context. His silly laugh, as we called it, was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh. My younger sister did this exact same thing once. I was fortunate enough to have been around for a few years to meet my great-grandmother. I still remember her to this day. When I was very young, my mom fell on rough times and we had to live with my grandparents and a few other family members. Just your run-of-the-mill, typical Latino household in the 90s. She sadly passed away from cancer when I was about 4 years old, but she was surrounded by her loved ones, so we were each other's support system. About a year later, my little sister was born. One random day when I was around 11 and my sister was maybe 7 or 8, my mother and I were cleaning the living room in the apartment building we were then living in. She went to open the entertainment center and found a ton of old frames and pictures that I guess she forgot she put in there way back when. As we were going through them, my younger sister walked over and exclaimed, "Hey, that's the nice lady." At the top of the stack was a picture of my great-grandmother. My mom and I looked at each other puzzled, knowing that there was no way she could have known her. When my mom asked her how, she said that she often saw my great-grandmother sitting on her bed in our shared bedroom. My son did something similar. My dad passed away when my son was just over a month old. My dad got to see him about a week before he passed. Fast forward to when my son was just over 2 years old. He grabs a picture of me and my dad off one of the shelves and he's looking at it. I said, "Who's that?" and pointed to myself. He says, "Dada." Then I pointed to my dad and said, "Who's that?" And without missing a beat he says, "Grandpa." We had not taught him grandpa either because my wife's side is called Opa and not grandpa. I was speechless for a moment. The photo was from several years before, when my dad was younger and my son was only a distant thought. Makes me wonder if my dad comes to visit him sometimes. I had a similar experience. My parents told me that when I was about 2 or 3 years old, they could hear me laughing in my room. Not just giggling like I often did, but full-on laughing as if someone was playing with me. Then went and checked on me and asked what I was doing. I told them I was playing with a friend. They thought I was talking about an imaginary friend or something, so they asked me this friend's name. I told them I was playing with Shadow, which was my grandfather's, my mom's dad, nickname. This grandfather passed away a little over 3 years before I was born, and according to my parents there is no way I knew about him. My mom, understandably, no pet out of there, but my dad stayed and asked me more questions about this friend. We had no pictures of him in the house and they had never told me about him yet. My dad says I described him perfectly, down to the kind of glasses and his favorite clothes he used to wear. Interesting. I had forgotten this exact thing happened when my son was 3 or 4. My grandpa had died before my son was born and there is absolutely no chance he would have known his name. The picture was of my grandfather in his teens. It was really emotional for my mom to hear. It was her father, and it certainly shocked both of us. Thank you for reminding me of that. My oldest daughter was maybe 3 or 4 at the time this took place. We were outside playing during summertime. Flowers scattered around the ground. She picks up one and just looks kind of to my side and then back at me and says, "He grows the prettiest flowers." And I got chills because I knew instantly who she was talking about, but I continued the conversation by saying, "Baby, who are you talking about?" And she simply said, "Papa." She had to have been referring to my grandfather, who I called Papa. He had some of the most beautiful rose bushes that lined his house. When I was growing up, I lived next door. My window faced the side of the house that these roses grew on. He even grew Lucille Ball roses for me when I was a bit older and obsessed with "I Love Lucy." I have that specific rose tattooed on me now. Made me smile when she said it. When I was a kid, about 10 to 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while Mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair. So naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, well, guess I'm about to die, while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Thanks for all the awards. I'll have to holler to the stairway ghost and let it know the internet loves it. You better thank that stairwell ghost. We had a stair ghost too. When my mum was heavily pregnant, She used to sit in front of the fire in the den with the dogs at her feet. One night, both dogs jerked awake and proceeded to watch someone climb the spiral staircase, but nobody was there. She's pretty sure it was her mom, checking that our bedroom, twins, yay, was ready for us coming, because the dogs were calm and she said she just felt this really reassuring presence. Fast forward 6-ish years and I woke up one night to find my mom sitting at the end of my bed and basically running a soothing hand up and down my leg. Said to her the next day that it was really nice, or something along those lines. I was young, and she was absolutely terrified because she didn't come into our room. My mom is the spitting image of her mom, so I'm guessing it was my grand soothing me back to sleep. I have 2 incidents like that. When I was a small child, I had no fat on me and dense bones. In water, I would sink like a stone. I also couldn't swim. I was at a pool with no lifeguard. All occupants were in the shallow end. I fell in the deep end and started sinking. I knew I was gonna die. But someone pushed me up and my mom saw my arms flailing. I felt someone push me out as she grabbed me. I turned back to see who saved me, but there was no one. The second experience found me riding my bike. I was 14, with my baby sister, she was 9. I was going pretty fast when she turned in front of me. My bike flipped and I went flying over my sister. I felt hands grab me under my arms. I felt like I floated as I landed on my feet. My little sister looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "How did you do that?" "You floated in the air." Neither of us have any explanation, but it broke my bike. To this day my sister and I still talk about it. There was no way I should have flown off by bike the way I did, nor could I have launched myself high enough to land on my feet, or as high as my sister said I floated. You got some ghost very interested in keeping you around lol. I have a friend that had the same experience. He was a child, they were vacationing in Mexico at the beach and he started to drown. He felt hands helping him, and when he looked back, there was no one there. Guardian angels are great. I was at a summer camp once and my friend and I were playing in the pool. She nearly drowned when she was very young, so she hated deep water and only went in the shallows. Eventually I went to dive in the deep end and she said she wanted to come. So we dove in, and immediately she starts sinking. She just froze, no movement. I grabbed her shoulder and tried to pull her up, but I was a tiny kid and she was a lot bigger than me. As I was panicking, I felt something start to push her up, and with its help I got her above the surface. She was fine, just very shaken. She'd had a flashback to the trauma and just froze up. I'm religious, and I honestly think it was a guardian angel. I'm so thankful for that. Thank you for sharing your story. I am so glad your or her guardian angel was there for you. What I didn't tell in my comments was how, once I got down to a certain depth, where I could feel the water pressure in my head, a moment of calm realization that I was going to die hit me. I felt so bad for my mom because I knew how much it would hurt her. I then prayed to God not to let me die. That's when I felt myself being pushed up and eventually out of the water. Back in 2010, my family and I lived in a really nice home out in the woods, and there was always weird things that happened in that home that was unexplainable. One day I was coming up the stairs from my basement, and as I rounded the corner I saw a shadowy figure running up the stairs from the main floor to the top floor. I only saw it from the corner of my eye and the figure was gone in an instant. Fast forward a couple of years, I have moved on to college and my parents decided they were going to sell the home to downsize. They had just got done repainting most of the walls, and I asked my cousin if she could take a picture so I could see how the new walls looked. She took the picture in the back of our living facing the front of the house, which just so happened to have the staircase to the right, and in the picture was that same shadow I had seen year prior. She was the only one in the home when the picture was taken, and it looks like the shadow is looking right at you. I have the picture posted in my profile history if anyone wants to see it. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures, posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam. 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual f***ck? At that point, there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. Frick. I've had an experience just like this. Had a disturbing dream like that about someone who I hadn't talked to in months. Woke up in a panic at 3 a.m. Without knowing why, I just went and stood in the kitchen, then started crying. Found out later that day they overdosed in their kitchen at 3 a.m. I was home alone in high school. It looked like car headlights were shining through our kitchen door, which didn't make sense because it was next to a field. I looked out the kitchen door and the lights were coming from about 50 feet off the ground. It was a row of 3 white lights and 1 red light. I opened the door and there was complete silence and the whole field was lit up. I closed the door quickly, turned around and it was gone. I saw something similar during my evening jog. It was getting dark, and a shining light object fell into the woods nearby. I was approximately 20 meters away from it, and to this day I have no explanation for it. I have a similar story. I'll try to TLDR it. So driving along a very remote highway in my 180SX with very dark side and rear window tint at about 3 a.m. on a pitch black night. About 50 kilometers from anywhere, no cars, no streets, not even a place for someone to pull over without being very obvious. All of a sudden, the whole inside of the car is lit up like daylight. Not overly bright to look at, but everything was well illuminated. It only lasted for maybe 2 seconds, then it was gone. I immediately checked in all directions to see where it came from and there was nothing anywhere. My next thought was maybe a helicopter, but I couldn't hear anything, and the light did not seem to light up the road around the car. Just the inside. At this point I thought I must have imagined it. A bit shaken, I kept driving and tried to ignore it. After about 5 minutes, I turned to my friend in the passenger seat and asked him if he saw the light, and we both freaked out. He had seen it, but he also didn't say anything because it didn't make sense. We never did figure it out. Anyway, a few years later I got a night shift job which frequently had me and everyone else starting and finishing at weird hours and traveling a lot at night. You'd work with one other person but would change partners almost every night. I had at least 2 people tell me similar stories that had happened to them without me ever promoting them or telling anyone at that place what had happened to me. The reason the type of car is relevant was because they have a shallow slope to the front window. It would be easy to light up the interior from above, but then the other people, one was on a boat fishing, the other in a 4x4 truck. So that theory doesn't really add up. Maybe a plane with a spotlight? Or actually maybe a plane reflecting moonlight directly into your car as it flew over. I had something similar happen as well. I was thinking about it but didn't think it weird enough for this post. I lived in a basement apartment on a mountainside. I woke up thinking it was daylight because light was streaming in the window. The back window, it was pitch black, the front window was bright as day. The building was right on the road, which went straight up the mountain. I thought maybe it was a police helicopter or construction work. It was completely silent and I didn't see anything up or down the street. Across the street was a cliff that had heavy woods on top. No way a vehicle could move through it. No place for cranes to hide off the road. It was a very powerful spotlight coming from higher than the building. It didn't move. After 10 minutes I went back to bed since it was like 3 a.m. Makes me wonder how many fools see a light in the sky and go outside to investigate in the middle of the night. Bitch, I ain't going out there, I got warrants. Awesome smiley face. I have one similar to this. I was 17 driving home from work about midnight. I lived in a really small country town in southern Pennsylvania. I was driving down a really dark back road with no lights except my vehicle. I started to pass a field and around the outer part of the field was woods with a break where another field was, and in that second field I saw. I know this sounds so cliche, but it was a saucer-shaped object hovering in the sky with round lights all around it. That's how I could see it was saucered. I slowed my car down to attempt a better look. I noticed that there was no noise or trees moving. The thing was literally just hovering. I looked for 30 seconds or so before I got super spooked with a bad feeling and drove off. I looked as long and hard as I could so I can confidently tell this story. I've turned it over and over in my head for a decade and still can find no conclusion of what it was. It was huge, silent, hovering, saucer with round lights around it. Possibly will-o-wisps. These, under the right conditions, can appear as lights or balls of lightning. See the natural explanation section. Something similar like this happened to me. I was staying at a friend's house. This was my first time visiting this house and I have problems sleeping in new environments. Anyway, the room I was staying in was a sitting room right next to the front door. At around 3 in the morning, the whole room filled with lights. They seemed like headlights, and at the time I chalked it up to someone going to work. I didn't hear the car, though it was deathly silent. Moments later the lights went out and that was that. Nothing else happened. The next day I looked around at the neighbors and none of them had driveways. They parked on the street and no cars were or could face the house cause the street was so narrow. Where I live, these are called min lights. Random orbs that often resemble car headlights and appear in the night when you're alone. You can look them up for further explanation. My grandmother described something much like this happening to her as a child in the 30s to 40s. Rural Mississippi. Gravel road in the middle of nowhere. Seen in the middle of the night out her open bedroom window. No sound at all. She was not a fanciful person and didn't make up scary stories. Just mentioned that she'd always wondered what it was. I thought about not posting this, but there's just something eerie about unexplainable lights. Me and my buddy live in suburb Texas. Normal city life. We are outside my parents' duplex smoking some blunts as we normally do. We don't have chairs out there, so we are just standing out here at 3:45 a.m. with our porch light on. I can't recall, but I don't believe anyone lived next door yet. Anyway, it's set up to where there's a long corridor walkway made by the duplex walls to get onto the porch. Leave the complex, so past the porch is just sky, but you have to walk in order to look left and right. Anyway, we are out here smoking, talking about high shit, and all of a sudden you can see a soft glowing pillar of light from the right top side of the building that my buddy sees. A loud machine whirring occurred. Seconds later the entire sky goes from black to midday for about 15 seconds. Mind you, it's 3:45 a.m. I'm on my porch and all I can see is the sliver of sky. I look over at Pat. His jaw dropped. "Did you see that?" I said. "Yay, what the frick just happened?" IDK, there was a pillar of light that disappeared and then you heard the machine whirring and all of a sudden it was daytime. Come. I tell him, well, whatever the frick that was, it's not going to happen again. He points over in the direction. Out comes the pillar of light. The machine whirring happens 3 consecutive times. Loud, like a ray blaster the size of a mountain is being shot. Then, daytime washing the darkness away as you look from right to left. 30 seconds later and we're back to darkness. We finish the blunt, continuing to talk about what that could have been and if we just experiences some government test or if that was some kind of alien sign. We don't know what could change the night sky into daytime as far as the eye can see. Later on in life we found a video online of something similar, although it was unexplained there as well. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him. No other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. Imagine finally having a decent out-of-body experience and you end up at work instead of like some tropical beach. Poor man astral planed into work while on vacation. That's some job dedication there. Did he return? Yeah, He came back from vacation right on time and was pretty spooked since the boss had called to check on him and told him what happened. Couldn't offer any explanation still, and neither could anyone else. Did you show him the video with him in it? I assume my boss might have. Officially, it was out of policy for me to show him. I was very young when all this happened, so I don't have the clearest memories of it. But in the room I grew up in, apparently I used to scream bloody murder all night because of the thing watching me in the room. I have very hazy memories of being comforted by my parents, and I can also remember the feeling I had of knowing I was being watched. Well, when my dad finally paid off the mortgage to the house and received the deed, we found out the last owner had died in that room. No idea if these events are connected, but whenever my husband has stayed in that house, he's always actively avoided that room, and I prefer to stay well away from it. 120. I have read another Redditor in this thread saying something similar. When he was a kid, he wouldn't get inside his room, grabbing the door and screaming the exact same thing, bloody murder. Once their parents manage to get them in the room, they start crying their eyes out, and the mom asks why. They answer, funny man. Funny man in the corner. That's so interesting. I guess that shows younger children have much more awareness of the weird and strange. When my daughter was about 10, she joined a softball league and I, Dad, taught her how to throw, hit, etc. I took her to a local Class AAA minor league game. I had never been to this stadium before, approximately 16,000 seats, and had ordered tickets online. The seats I got were down the third base line, about as far away from home plate as you can get and still be in the stadium. Important. As the game progresses, she sees foul balls going into the stands and after a while asks if you can keep one if you catch it. I told her yes, and she said, "Catch me one, Daddy." Quote. I spent a few minutes explaining to her why that was very unlikely to happen where we were. As I'm finishing breaking her heart, I hear a bat crack, look up, and see a long, towering fly ball, and knew immediately from my years playing baseball that this one was coming to me. All I had to do was stand up, raise my glove hand to my right ear. I'm a lefty, and that ball smacked perfectly in the webbing. The crowd cheered. 25 years later, I still have the memory of my daughter's face as I gave it to her. When I think about all the factors that had to come together for that to happen, a lefty batter, the right pitch and swing, the badly selected seating, that I even found and brought my old glove, it affirmed my belief that there is a higher power who sometimes grants small miracles. Edited typo. It was a AAA team, one step below the majors. I doubt there's a single team in the country that plays in this large a stadium. That's an awesome memory. What a sweet story. 4 years ago, my daughter walked into my room while my wife and I were asleep. She nudged me and said, "Dad isn't breathing." I was like, "Honey, I'm fine. I'm right here and I'm okay." She replied with, "He won't wake up." "Why won't Dad wake up?" I said, "Honey, I'm awake and I'm talking to you." She then turns around and goes back to bed. I look at the clock and it's 2:11 a.m. My wife says, "What's that about?" I said, "I don't know," and we go back to sleep. The next morning, we're all at work just talking and getting ready for the day at 8-ish, and my boss comes over and informs us that one of our coworkers passed in the night. We're talking about this and we ask how and when. My boss then tells us he died from a heart attack at around 2 a.m. is what they told his wife. I have to sit down and recollect to when my daughter came into our room saying everything she did. At the time, he was remodeling his new home and his wife was staying at her mom's house. His daughter was staying with him as her school was closer to the new home and he could drop her off before coming to work. My daughter and his daughter became good friends from playing softball together. All I could think of was my daughter was acting out what his daughter was saying and trying to wake him up at that time. My daughter was 5 at the time and his daughter was sleeping in the bed with him due to it being a new house and being a little scary at the time. I still think about that today, but my daughter has no recollection of ever coming in the room that night. My daughter and her remain friends, but she no longer plays softball as that was their thing. She seems to be doing better after counseling and being the one that found him that night. My wife and his wife have remained friends too, and she still struggles with it. Their son, on the other hand, has had severe problems and refused counseling. But he is working and got a scholarship to swim in college. On the outside he seems fine, but I know things are still bottled up and hope he does finally seek closure with it. Whoa, that is creepy and kind of cool in a sad way though. That's not the only weird story with my daughter. She's had a few weird events happen to her with us around. Here's another one. This happened last year when she was 8. We took a vacation to St. Augustine, FL. As many know, the city is haunted and has a lot of weird things. We went to the lighthouse, Castillo de San Marcos, and the cemeteries around town. One afternoon we decided to go to the St. Augustine jail. Tons of history and a lot of atrocities. We are on the tour and getting stories about things that happened there, stories about the warden, who was in this cell, etc. We get near the end of the tour and you're in an office area. There's a typewriter on a desk next to the door with several desks around the room. The guide starts telling a story when my daughter walks over to the typewriter desk and sits down. She starts going through the drawers, all the while I'm like, get back over here. You can't do that. The guide stops and tells me to let her continue as he's seen this before. We all just stop and watch her go through this desk. She finally gets what she's looking for and puts the paper sheet perfectly into the back and reels it in. She starts typing, but of course there's no ink, but she doesn't notice and continues to type. She stops and spins the paper back as if you've missed something, and she reading over it. Says it looks okay and pulls out the paper and leaves the desk and walks over to another desk and leaves the paper there. She then simply walks back to us and watches the tour guide. He then goes on to ask her what she did. She said the warden needs to sign that before we can hang the man. Then he asks her who she is and she says her own name. Then asks her, why did you get on the typewriter? She says the lady next to the desk asked me to help her. Oh Jesus, creepy AF. I had a similar but not as tragic experience a few months ago. I was on a trip with my girlfriend in Mexico City. My family lives in Ohio, and woke up one morning sort of in a panic as I had a dream where my mom had called me and kept saying, they took Grandma. Crying almost in a way where she was telling me that she had passed on in a non-direct way, but IDK dreams are weird. I immediately texted my mom asking her if she was okay, and she replied, yes, and if I had heard anything, to which I replied no, and I did not, mentioning the dream. The next day my whole family, except for me, went to a Cleveland Indians game and my grandma had a severe stroke. She ended up in the hospital, so I flew home as soon as I could. Turns out she had 3 brain aneurysms and it wasn't looking good. While talking to her in the hospital, she kept talking about how the night before I came to see her there were 2 little boys and a man standing in the room while she was reading her newspaper, which she said made her feel comfortable, but obviously weird. BC, they weren't really there. The day I came to visit was when things started to get better as the hospital was able to stabilize her blood pressure. The night where she saw the people in her room, she apparently had extremely low blood pressure, which I guess could cause hallucinations. All in all, she is much better now as the aneurysms have calcified, which is dope. But the whole experience has really opened my eyes to the idea of how humans are connected in some weird way. My mom had breast cancer when I was very young. Her last hospitalization for pneumonia during chemo was the worst of them all. She didn't know if she would make it. The day before her discharge, they were waiting for her white blood cell labs to come back. A red-headed nurse came into her room and told her that the tests showed that her WBC had increased and were now in the normal range. She left the room. My mom was ecstatic. A couple minutes later, my mom's doctor came in and explained the test results to her. My grandma and mom told him that a nurse had already let them know. The doctor said that he just came from the lab and no one else could have had that information. My grandma went to the front desk and asked about the red-headed nurse. There was no red-headed nurse that worked that shift. My mom beat her cancer and left thinking she and my grandmother met an angel. My buddy told me a good one. He's a Dominican kid from Washington Heights in NYC, moved to Massachusetts where I met him riding motorcycles. He is a very serious guy, 30 years old. Doesn't joke around too much, very matter of fact, very honest, and very dependable. When he was around 13 years old, his brother and him went to visit his aunt nearby. She was an in-home healthcare helper for an older guy. So they went over to the older guy's house to visit the aunt and sleep over for a few days. The old guy was cool with it. The first night there they were trying to fall asleep. Their beds were in a furnished attic. He said he was staring at the ceiling, trying to get tired, and finally settling down. At some point he looked down at his feet and saw a woman in the corner of the room, sitting in a chair, rocking, looking at him. She was dressed in white clothes and somewhat glowing in a pitch-black room. He freaked out, got up, ran out of the room, ran downstairs and started crying. As he was sitting there freaking out, he was looking up the stairs at the bedroom he had just ran out of, which was along a hallway. He saw the same woman run across the upstairs hallway super fast. He basically shit his pants and started bawling. His aunt ran over to him, hearing his cries, and asked what was wrong. He told her what he saw. She said, "You'll be okay, just go back to bed." The next day the aunt showed him a picture of the older man and his wife and asked him if this was the woman he had seen. He said yes, that was her. She said she had just passed in the house not long ago. She also told him that she sees her around the house too. My friend saw her once more when he was downstairs playing video games that week. She walked through the room he was in, looked at him, and walked into the wall. I guess my friend's grandmother would also come to visit the aunt, her daughter, at the mom's house. She had already been there quite a few times before my friend visited. The old man and my friend's grandmother hit it off and were kind of flirtatious with one another. I guess his grandma was leaving the house one day and left the door open, closing only the screen door behind her. As she was walking down the stoop, the main door slammed behind her violently. I usually wouldn't believe a story like this, but this kid is not the type to make something up. Like I said, he is very matter of fact, cut and dry. This story alone makes me believe, more than I did before, that there is some form of afterlife or purgatory. I believe him 100%. It sounds like the ability to have these visions runs in his family because his aunt and him both saw the deceased woman. Also, I'm just curious if people could post a quick comment on why they would downvote this post. I see the upvotes going up and down. I'm not sure why someone would downvote unless they think it's bullshit. Or you don't like the fact that I semi-believe in an afterlife. I'm just curious. The Reddit crowd is an odd one. Would love to know what their reason is for disliking this post. Anything articulable besides me making you read more than a meme's worth of text. There is an afterlife. Don't let skeptics tell you there isn't. I'm not basing my opinion off of other people's opinions. I'm just basing it off of common sense and gut feeling. I don't believe every creature on Earth goes to the afterlife. Like every dog, fish, bird, snake. Sometimes I assume it is the same for humans. Then, other times I wonder if humans are a special creature. As my great-grandfather passed away, my aunt and uncle had an unopened voicemail on their landline answering machine. As they listened to the voicemail, it sounded exactly like my great-grandpa saying, "God help me," before it faded off. The thing that trips me out the most is how my aunt and uncle requested a log of their incoming, outgoing calls, and that there were no calls logged in that time frame. I've heard the voicemail, so bananas. Late to the party, but when I was 10 I lost my grandfather. We were very close. A few days later I was lying in bed listening to the radio. I looked over at my closet and there he was, standing there watching me. His outline was bright white, glowing, and he was translucent. I blinked and he was gone. My dogs and I just sat there staring in shock. I knew it was him saying goodbye. After that my dogs would just randomly start to growl over in that corner, then they got used to it and would just stare, as if in a trance. They could see him, I couldn't. I would just say, "Hi Pop," and smile and go about my business. A lot of things afterwards have told me he's still watching over me. My aunt told my mom she saw the same thing as me in church 2 weeks later. We all went to the same church, it was my grandfather's church. My mom never told her what I saw, but she described the same thing I saw. My mom didn't believe me at first, thought I was just mourning. She believed me after that. She didn't tell me to my face she didn't believe me, she told me years later. And now I'm 30, with kids of my own. We live in the house I grew up in. Ever since my son could start speaking, "Mom, Dad," simple words, he'd point in that same closet and say, "Pop." He was like 10 months old when he started. Of course I never spoke to him about my grandfather. He's almost 3 now and still goes, "Mommy's Pop." My husband and I just ignore it in front of him. It creeps my husband out, but it makes me happy to know he's still watching out for me and my family. The night my grandma died, well, first I went over to my grandpa's house to console him and help with anything I could. Later on I went home to feed my dogs. We had 4 dogs at the time. In the middle of feeding them, they all looked up at the ceiling and started barking. Which was really weird, not only because there was nothing there, but because there was food beneath them, which should have their attention. I thought, maybe it was her. And I just gave this really heartfelt goodbye, told her how I loved her and how she was the sweetest person. I don't know if I believe in any of this or not, but yeah, that's what happened. It was definitely her. Your dog saw or sensed her. That definitely wasn't a coincidence. She was saying goodbye and letting you know she's still with you, smiley face. Cute. But why hide in the bloody closet? Why not near a window or the patio? LMAO, I wouldn't say in the closet. Just like standing in front of it in the corner. My guess is he wanted me to see him. He waited until I was in my room alone, no distractions, so I saw him. And he appeared where he could, I suppose. Also, it was across from my bed, so all I had to do was look up and see him. Wow. So crazy cool that your kid could see him too. That's definitely a sign. Yeah, I was blown away by that. We also have pictures of my grandfather in my house. I never told him who my pop was in the pictures. Why would I? He's too young. But he'd point at his pictures and say, "Mommy's pop, too." He's never met him before, yet knows exactly who he is. It's crazy. Another crazy thing is, sometimes he'll just point up to the ceiling or sky and say, "Pop." Like he has no idea about heaven or anything yet, but knows he's up there, or has seen him. IDK how he knows, but he does. It's pretty comforting though. I had something similar happen. My grandma was at the end of her fight with cancer, and my other grandma was staying with me and my brother as my mom was caring for her, hours away. My brother and I got home from school one day and checked the answering machine to find this raspy, exhausted-sounding woman's voice saying, "My name, brother's name. I love you, I need you." I remember getting a huge chill and instantly tearing up, knowing it was my grandma. When we talked to my mom later and told her Grandma called, she said that was impossible because she had been in a coma on hospice care and there was no phone in her room. This was in the late 90s before everyone had cell phones and there was only one landline in the apartment. Unfortunately, my other grandma deleted the message since I think she was as spooked as us kids or something. I'll never forget that voice though. I still tear up thinking about it to this day. I would have been so mad that it was deleted. Even if it was eerie, I still would have wanted something of my grandma's. Yeah. My mom is still mad about it to this day. Already posted this a year and a half ago, but I'll go again. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working, was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning, she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year I knew her whole family. Among these was her husband that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy. Just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid, and after all these years spent together, he basically considered me as a grandson. Now back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there, she looked at me and said in a sad tone, "Dave is inside there." Now if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said while still being half asleep, "Come on Dave, let me get back to sleep." Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it, and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. Also, sorry for format and grammar, but I'm on mobile and English isn't my first language. I had a similar experience after my brother died where I felt him sit on the side of my bed. It was dark, but I could still make out his outline, and I felt the bed shift under the weight of someone sitting on it. I was a young teen at the time and it terrified me, so I slid under the covers and said, "I love you, but can you please go away?" And then he disappeared. When I woke up in the morning, my dad told me my brother had come to visit him in the night. That burglar must have felt so touched and confused when you told him you loved him. I have had a few things happen to me over the years. One that I will share is one night I woke up at 3 a.m., eyes wide open, and knew that there was a reason for it. A split second later I hear 3 loud thuds in the hallway of our bungalow, not on a door, like a closed fist slamming the wall 3 times, slowly. I got up, checked around, and got back in bed and couldn't make sense of it and went to sleep. Following evening after work I was talking to my daughter and asked her was she up or doing anything in her room. She said no, but that she woke up in the early hours to 3 bangs in the hallway. I was spooked a bit by it. Something happened to me years ago at this hour to do with a dead family member before. Not bangs though, that's another story in itself. Me being me was Googling and looking up about 3 knocks at 3 a.m. etc. Came across a few people who posted online about it being a sign someone is going to die that you know. Weeks went by and it's all forgotten about. My father rings me then one day and to tell me my uncle isn't well, he has COVID. He is in a different country, we haven't seen or heard from him in a long time, and he is in the hospital but not on ventilation. Details were sparse. He was in a country with a language barrier and in a relationship with a woman who didn't have good English, so we found it hard to get updates on his health. But as soon as my father had rang me and said that to me, something clicked in my brain that my uncle wasn't going to make it. As sad and negative as that sounded at the time, I just knew in my mind that was the truth. My mother rang me then a few days later. I answered the phone and before she said anything I said, "He has died, hasn't he?" And he had. Now here is the part that makes the hair stand on my neck even as I type this story and relive it. When these 3 thuds on the wall happened, I recorded the date in my phone and time and what happened the next day because for some reason it felt significant. When I got the call from my mother weeks later, I think of these knocks and what I read about it being a warning of someone dying that you know. I check my phone and check the date these happened. 3 a.m. I wake up to 3 loud knocks, and exactly 3 weeks later to the date that those knocks happened, I received that phone call from my mother to let me know my uncle had died. My granddad died when I was 7, but, per his own words, I was his absolute favorite, partially because I am the splitting image of his mother, even into adulthood. When I was 21, I was set to give birth to my first son. I was about to get into the elevator to L&D when a man came in saying that he'd volunteer and he'd help me and my husband find our way. The elevator was slow, but we spent the time talking about what a blessing children are and how they grow up so fast. Here's the thing. He looked and sounded exactly like my granddad. Same stature, same blue-gray eyes, same faint Scottish-Canadian accent, same khakis, checked shirt, and sky blue cardigan. Even spookier is that the nurses said they don't have any older male volunteers in that particular building. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I am absolutely certain Granddad paid me a visit that night. My brother passed away in 2018 suddenly, about 3 weeks after I was having surgery on my hand. I was waking up from surgery and my brother was standing in the doorway. I started freaking out and the nurses were thinking I was in pain, but I couldn't tell them my dead brother is over there. He visited again when I was in labor last year. He told me he was so proud of me and that I can do it because I'm strong like a Viking. I was in labor on his birthday and gave birth at 1:12 a.m. Warms my heart. He really loved you. One night as I was walking my dog, he broke his leash. He instantly started to run completely scared, in the dark, and I couldn't find him anymore. I searched for him all night until 0300 am, but he disappeared. I walked back home very sad and told my mom that my dog disappeared. This night my mom had a dream and she saw in that dream where exactly was the dog. The next morning I went to the place she saw in the dream and damn, my dog was there. While working at the City Tavern in Old City, Philadelphia, considered to be one of the most haunted buildings in the US, have seen full dinner service, plates, utensils, glasses and all fly off the table we called Big Round in the middle of dinner service. Not sorta topple over, but full-on suicide eat off the table. Personally, I have witnessed this occur twice, with one of the times being a slower dinner service with nobody seated at the round. But it happened often enough that every server, and even a few customers, came to expect it from time to time. I am sure there is a logical explanation for it occurring. Maybe a really specific vibration from the subway was my best guess. Except the train doesn't go below the historic district. When opening, the building would sometimes sound like many people were in it, even when we knew it was only a few of us there. Place is huge, and lots of stairwells, dumb waiters, so I guess it's a trick of acoustics? Weird icy drafts out of nowhere, shifting furniture, etc. Every haunted house cliché seems to just naturally occur in the place. Ask anyone who ever worked there. The place is straight up spooky at times. Sadly, Chef Walter Stibe, the last proprietor, had to close the place due to COVID-19 and will not be reopening. This is only the second time the place has closed in its 250-year history. I'm going to keep my eye on this place. I'm planning a big trip down the eastern seaboard the summer of 2023, and Philadelphia is going to be at least 3 days of it. If this place is reopened by then, I'm so going. You want spooky? Go to Point Lookout, Maryland. Or if you go for the Eastern Shore instead, try and swing by Harriet Tubman's place near Blackwater. Added to the list, my daughter is turning into the little goth horror kid in her class and she would flip for these places. Thanks. The tavern will probably be open for some sort of tour situation by the Park Service, even if it's not functioning currently. Your daughter will love the place. Well, when I was around 6 years old, I was walking down the stairs, no one was behind me, and all of a sudden I remember getting chills, then feeling a faint hand on my shoulder before I got basically pushed down the stairs. I was alright, a few cuts and bruises, nothing serious, but I still remember the feeling of the invisible hand on my shoulder. It haunts me. I've had a really similar thing happen, though I didn't get pushed down the stairs. When I was 18-19 and still adjusting to life after high school, I remember being really lonely because all my friends had moved away to go to college and I was the only one who stayed in our hometown and went to community college, so I was also dealing with feeling less than because I didn't go to university right after high school. Definitely don't regret it now though. I remember just wishing that I had a companion or a friend who would just be with me when I was feeling especially sad or lonely, and every time I had that thought, I would feel a hand. It would be on my shoulder or my back, occasionally my lower back and even my thigh once or twice, but there was definitely something there. I could feel the weight and the warmth of it. It wasn't really scary after the first few times, I got used to it eventually. It also didn't feel malicious. It just felt like someone standing next to, behind me, putting their hand on me to comfort me. I always felt a little better, like I wasn't alone and everything was going to be okay. Eventually I made some new friends and the loneliness went away, and eventually so did the hands. I can still feel them occasionally when I'm driving alone at night and start to get creeped out by the dark and scary roads, or when I start to feel nervous about moving out of my childhood home next month. Sometimes I think it might be my great-grandpa, who died when I was 5 and is the only person I've known who has died, but I also like to think it could be someone who was just like me at some point and is just trying to comfort me in the way they wanted to be comforted when they were in my shoes. Similar story. One exceedingly normal night I went to bed, which really meant that I waited for everyone to fall asleep, then snuck downstairs to the computer room. I did this a few times a week and was regularly caught, but this was before parental controls were really a thing. Normally my dad would catch me, he has insomnia, and would give me a disappointed look and a sigh, lecture me, and be majorly pissed off while telling me to go back upstairs. I think we all know from childhood that the footsteps of your family members on the stairs or past your room or whatever are recognizably different from one another. So I hear my dad, who is the heaviest of us, coming down the stairs. I can tell he's really tired because he's going slowly. I know I'm about to be sent to bed, so I'm closing my Internet Explorer windows and getting mentally ready to be told off. The lights in the computer room were always off during my midnight internet expeditions because you could see it from the top of the stairs. So I'd just be staring at this bright glowing computer screen, which distorted my ability to see around the dark room super well. So I hear my dad finally reach the bottom of the stairs. I see his silhouette walk through the hallway to come up behind me. He puts his hand on my shoulder. Again, he's a heavy guy, so it's not a light touch, and I say, "I know, I'm sorry, I'm getting off now." I start shutting down the computer. The hand stays on my shoulder a few seconds more, then it's gone, and I'm wondering why my dad hasn't said anything by now. Swivel around in my chair and no one is there. The weirdest thing about this is how normal it felt. Everything seemed just peachy and I knew it was my dad, etc., etc. The only different things were how slow he went down the stairs and him touching my shoulder, which by all means wasn't something he never did, was just not something he'd normally do in that situation. Obviously I ran to bed as fast as possible after. But I still wonder. I am probably the most skeptical person you'll ever meet, and was long past any fear of ghosts at this point, but I have no idea what happened that night. I still don't believe in supernatural things, like, at all. Haven't experienced anything else remotely as weird or unexplained at any other time in my life. But it opened me up to the idea that unexplained things happen to people that feel 100% authentically real. Oh wow, something similar happened to me, and, already, ex of mine and I just had a quiet seething argument at his place. I was walking behind him down the stairs from a third-floor apartment. A sudden feeling of danger or caution overwhelmed me when I felt a push behind me and I almost tumbled down the stairs. All in the same moment, the ex looked up at me from the next landing with utmost contempt on his face. I know he didn't have superpowers, and I don't believe in demonic possession, but he exuded pure evil. It did feel like he had just wished I would die falling down the stairs and something was ready to fulfill that wish. I was just their collection some things and thought it would be the last of him in my life. It has been 20 years since that incident. At least once every year or so, he'll find a way to send me message. I was about 15 and trying to sleep but having an asthma attack. Late in the night I started hearing a rhythmic breathing from the floor next to the bed. It wasn't scary, more comforting. And it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more frigged up than that. It helped me calm down and get to sleep. Even though I was still sick, I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was that it had sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether a ghost dog came to visit me, or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me. When I bought my house, there was an above-ground pool that hadn't had a liner or pump for 15+ years. I put in a new liner and pump. I filled the pool and got it all working one evening. I was super happy to have done it myself and wasn't worried at all. That night I had a dream about my grandma who had died about 2 weeks prior. She woke me up from the dream at about 4 a.m. and all I knew was I had to go look at the pool. I went outside and found I hadn't tightened the hose clamp on the return hose and pool water was shooting from the hose. From the amount of water around, I could tell this happened no more than 5 minutes earlier. I put the hose back on, tightened the clamps, and I lost almost no water from the pool. I'm not superstitious and don't really believe in ghosts. But I don't have any explanation for it other than that Grandma still has yo back. She always did. She was an awesome old lady. She used to be the best at NES Dr. Mario, Paperboy, and Original Zelda. I'm a physician and my former medical assistant had quite a few different stories, but one of them was that she had a child that was about 5 or 6 or so who got quite sick. She took her to the hospital, and apparently they couldn't figure out what was wrong. Some young doctor came in and basically said to her, "They aren't going to find out what's wrong here. You have to go to XYZ hospital and they'll make the correct diagnosis there and help her get better." She apparently heeded the advice and transferred her daughter, and lo and behold, they did make some rare diagnosis or whatever and started the appropriate treatment. My MA went back to try and find this doctor to thank him, and she asked around and nobody knew anything about him. Apparently he didn't exist. Then later, at the new hospital, she was praying in the chapel. She's a devout Christian, and he came in. They talked a bit, she thanked him, and then he left and she never saw him again. However, at some point she mentioned this doctor to her daughter, and her daughter perked up or whatever and said she knew who he was. Apparently her daughter described him identically, although my MA had never brought him up to her before. He apparently would come in and sit with her sometimes. I guess the daughter kept seeing him sometimes for years, though later it was only if she was getting anesthesia, and then she would see him shortly beforehand or something like that. My MA, understandably I think, considers that he was an angel. That's not the only story I've heard reminiscent of that one, but I think that's maybe the best one. When I was going to my family's home, I got in a SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV, the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun, and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. Edit. He just vanished. No blood. He was wearing ethnic attire, which isn't peculiar around that area. He didn't speak at all, and we didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would be in the town my house was in. One thing that was weird was that he spoke in an oldish Bengali. Like a old Bengali that we'd see in poetry from the 1800s. I didn't see it as peculiar cause he seemed like an ascetic. Second edit. I have pics of the collision if you guys were wondering. Third edit. When I said he didn't speak at all, I meant during the ride. He didn't say anything other than where he wanted to go and insisting on my seat. This reminds me of my mother's mystery man story. She was stranded in the middle of a snowstorm after her car got stuck in the ditch. After a few hours of panic and cold, a tow truck appears with an old man at the wheel. He pulls her car out and she is so relieved that she insisted to pay him for his good deed, even though he assures her that he was happy to help without payment. She returns quickly to give him the cash, but he's gone and there are absolutely no tire tracks in the snow other than where she was stuck in the path to where her car was moved to. No trace of a tow truck ever pulling her car. The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mom and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people, other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes, my mom or my sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink." That was exactly how he'd ask my mom to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years now. That's actually pretty sweet lol, he waited for her. OMG, I have a similar story. The house I lived in growing up was 100% haunted. My mom would tell me stories all the time of things she would experience. I to this day remember so vividly being pushed down the stairs, crying, and my parents picking me up and making sure I was okay. Apparently I never fell down the stairs, but my twin brother did. My mom said I wasn't home at the time because she remembers me specifically going with my grandmother and older brother to church and my twin staying home with them that morning. Super weird. Perhaps this story was relayed to you right after coming back home from church and for whatever reason it stuck. A child's imagination can be pretty powerful, and surely you've had similar situations where you've got hurt and your parents have comforted you. So as you grow up, you forget bits and pieces, and some things blend together into events that never happened in the first place. Brains can be kinda bad with storing memory. Think of witness statements and how unreliable they can be, even soon after the event, and then compare that to trying to remember what happened decades ago when you were a kid. That is definitely super weird. They do say twins have a special bond. Sounds like you guys have that as well. A gift but not left with good feelings. My siblings and I all had the same dream on the same night a year ago. It was exactly 1 year after my mom died, and we all had a dream about her, and she was in the same place and was speaking to us. She reassured us that she was okay and she was with her mom and my dead siblings and that her dad is in the bad place. The next day we all realized we had the same dream. We even all independently drew a picture of the place we saw her and wrote down the name of the place it resembled. Most of my siblings took that as an actual message from my mom, but my youngest sister and I like to believe that we have all developed some freaky hive mind low-level telepathy lol. Not nearly as meaningful as yours, but in high school I experienced a really weird dream phenomenon. There was a girl I'd had a major crush on, but hadn't seen her in some time, and I had a dream she shaved her head. Next day in school, my best friend tells me for whatever reason he had a weird dream that we were hanging out with this girl and she'd shaved her head. Okay, a little odd. But now it gets real odd. Being teenagers with nothing to do, we hang out at the local coffee shop a lot, so that night we go there, and lo and behold, there she is, with a damn shaved head. We nearly ***** our pants. I could not believe it. It's so silly and stupid, but it made me wonder if there isn't some bigger fabric connecting us all, and the three of us tapped into it that night. Had a premonition I'd be involved in a car accident one morning on the way to work as I got out of bed. It was a very strange thought and I considered taking an alternate route but did not. As I got onto the highway it was raining and a car flew past me, hydroplaned, and slammed into my car. My mom had the premonition that my brother would not be safe when he was about to go on holiday. They were going to drive to Italy in his GF's car, what I can only describe as a yellow cookie jar with wheels underneath. She kept freaking out for a week, and the day before they left, she bought a second-hand VW Golf. Not a big car, but way less tinfoil and with a decent cage construction, you know, German, Grundlig Kate, and send them on their way. She had to jump through hoops to get it insured in time, but the insurance agent could tell she was borderline hysterical at that point. Friday afternoon at 16:50. Everything was about to close for the weekend, and made sure it happened. They took the car on Saturday morning and went on their way. Telephone rang 10 hours later. They got pancaked in a traffic jam in Switzerland. Car was totaled, but they didn't have a scratch. She felt bad for informing insurance next Monday about what happened. Really, she wanted to let it slide and take the financial loss. You can ask for too much, you know? But as it wasn't my brother's fault, it got dealt with anyway. Needless to say, she still is a big fan of VW. Was in college walking to class. Went to cross a busy street and a hand grabbed my shoulder, quite hard, and stopped me. A car zoomed by that would have killed me. Nobody was behind me or anywhere close enough to have stopped me. Guardian angel? I've had near-driving incidents like this multiple times. It feels like something else just takes the wheel and swerves it, and I'm having a silent, "oh, shit," moment as I jerk the wheel back in place. Invariably, when someone else is with me, it's, "Whoa, how did you miss that deer?" Some other hazard that I somehow magically dodged and didn't notice at the time. I'd like to think that I caught it but didn't consciously register it, like the lizard brain we all have was dodging shit. But I don't know, still weird. My mom was driving my brother and I somewhere on a narrow country road. My brother was in the passenger seat and I was behind him. We hit some black ice and the car just turns 90 degrees and suddenly our passenger side, with my brother and I, is now 100 meters or so from being T-boned by a big cube truck. My mom later said her only thought was that she was not going to let her kids get killed. She claims she just jerked the wheel, but we went from pointed at the left ditch to suddenly driving straight on our side of the road and the truck blew past. She went into the shoulder on our side a bit, but barely. She was basically just back to driving like normal. I'm not one to talk about angels, but my mom is and she definitely thinks her guardian was on active duty that day. Just FYI, my brother and I were both in our 20s, so I remember it quite vividly. We were adults, but we were still her kids and so she said, "Not today." Nice. You have made it to the end already. Thank you for watching. If you aren't already subscribed, please do so, as there will be more videos like this in the near future.